All right, hello and welcome to the help video for credit card questions. Here we'll be learning how the credit card companies charge you interest and how they determine what your payments are going to be, what interest rate and interest fees they're going to charge. So we're going to start off with some simple questions and work our way up to some more challenging ones. In this first series, we are asked to calculate what the interest payment on our credit card bill each month would be, how much our minimum payment, which never is what we should pay, but in the worst case situation would be what we have to pay is, and how much principal you still owe. Principal is always the balance or the amount that you owe, and we're going to determine how much that would be if we were to only make our minimum payment. So Moses has a balance, and again, whenever I see a balance, that is going to indicate to me my principal. Okay, so the balance here is his principal, and he realized that he was unable to pay this balance. So the credit card rate, anytime we see a rate, that is going to be our interest rate. Just remember that you divide it by 100 to get it as a percent, or a decimal rather than a percent. So before we get started, we need a set of equations, and I'll recap those for you. The way that we calculate interest is a general equation. Interest is principal times our rate times time. In these credit card questions, since our period of time is always going to be 1 month, we will change this time to a unit conversion of 1 year, because that's the unit we actually want, divided by 12 months. All right, or the same general format, but rewritten for simplicity. Interest is equal to our principal, our balance owing, times our interest rate divided by 12. All right, that is going to be how I solved A here. And again, all the information I need is given in this question. I have interest is equal to principal, which is $8,351, times my interest rate, 0.0, what do we got? Oh, sorry, 0.2436. Divide that by 100. 24 divided by 100 is 0.0246. And then I could take that answer and divide it by 12. And I'm going to get my interest rate is, let me punch in the calculator, 8351 times 0.2436 divided by 12 is an interest payment of $169.52. With the credit card companies, they'll always round up your cent. So if it's 5253, that would follow normal rounding rules. But if it's even anything, we would always round up. $169.53 would be the answer for A. Now, monthly minimum payment. We need a new equation. It does in part include the interest. Monthly minimum payment, though, we'll summarize it as minimum payment, is going to be my interest cost, which I just calculated, plus a payment off principal. Payment off principal, guys, is going to be the same for every credit card company, all right? And it's going to be calculated using 2% of your balance, or 0.02 times P. All right, so when we bring that all together, maybe I'll write the general form here where I have a bit more room. My minimum payment is equal to PR over 12 plus my payment off principal 0.02 times my principal again. All right, and I'm given all of that information in this question. I could actually use my answer from part A here to save a bit of time. 169.5253. That is my interest. That is my PR over 12. Plus, I will need to add to it 2%, 0.02, of that principal, $8,351. Multiply those together and add it to my interest. and I'm going to get a minimum payment amount of, bear with me while I punch this in the calculator, 0.02 times 8351. Minimum payment, therefore, is $336. And again, with the cents, they're always going to round that up. That's going to be 55 cents. On to C. So A was a pure penalty, my interest. B was actually how much my payment is going to show up on my credit card statement, the minimum payment I need to make. If I don't make that payment, there's going to be even more severe penalties and fees. And then C is how much principal I have remaining. And we have a new equation, a third and final credit card equation for this. Well, we'll introduce one more maybe. But our principal is equal to, or we'll call it actually the principal still owed, is equal to my initial principal minus my payment off principal. And again, that's 2% of it. Okay, so this is actually probably the shortest equation of them all. The amount I still owe, the balance or the principal I still owe, is equal to my original principal, $8,351, minus 2% of that principal. Same principal, $8,351. Throw that all in the calculator. 8351 minus 0.02 times 8351 gives me a remaining principal or a balance still owing of $8,183.98. And there you go. That is the first series. And once you get to the credit card quiz, that would be worth 3 marks on a quiz. On to series 2. Very similar with one little twist. So the same questions, interest, minimum payment, and principal remaining, but in series 2, right, we see the same questions, but in series 2, there is the addition of this payment off principal. And I don't love the wording of this. I would prefer this to be called a prepayment to a payment off principal, because we have a payment off principal when we calculate our minimum payment here and our remaining principal here. So let's not confuse ourselves. Let's just call this a prepayment. The only difference between series 1 and the next 2 series is we have a first step to determine, all right, what our new principal is. All right, our new starting principal. And that's the only new equation and the only new step here. New starting principal is going to be our starting amount. So we'll call the new starting principal P. So we can use it in all the same equations. And it's going to be equal to our initial balance owing minus our prepayment. So in this case, pretty straightforward. We are given an initial balance. So let's throw that in our equation. $102,000 or $10,216 minus my prepayment of $2,929. $2,929. That is now my new principal, which I'm going to throw in the calculator here. 10,216 minus 2,929 is a new principal of $7,287. Okay, that is the principal that I need for all of my questions. Not the amount that I originally owed. Because I made a prepayment, it's going to reduce all of the interest I owe. It's going to reduce my minimum payment. It will even reduce how much principal I have remaining. So that's the big trick with this second series. We are not waiting until the deadline and just paying the minimum payment. We are before the deadline of our credit card statement being due, making an additional payment off principal. And we'll call that our prepayment to avoid confusion. With that, we just jump right into the remainder of the question. All right, A, I already know my formula is PR over 12, but I need to use my reduced principal. So this is where if you're going to make a mistake on the question, you might use this full number, 10,000. I instead know I need to use my reduced 7,287. That's my starting principal. Then I have an interest rate given as 35. Again, I'm going to divide that by 100. And my interest rate is 0.3547. 3547. And I'm going to divide this interest by 12 because it's not an annual interest charge. This is on my monthly statement. So throw that in the calculator, 7287 times 0.3547 divided by 12. I end up with an interest charge and a penalty for not paying back my credit card in full on time of, that's actually going to round up to 40 cents. All right, so that would be my answer to part A. The penalty for having this outstanding principal of $7,000 is going to be $215 just for the month, and that's going to add up fast. All right, dangerous to use credit cards that excessively if you can't pay it off. B, again, my minimum payment. Again, the exact same formula. The only difference is I'm using this reduced principal, not the principal there. And if it means that you got to go and cross this one out, do that. All right. If you're tempted to look back there and use the wrong principal, remind yourself this is the one I need, not this one. Minimum payment is going to be my interest plus my payment off principal. Again, I calculated interest, so I can pull that number right from here, $215.40, plus a payment off principal, which is always going to be 0.02 of my principal, $7,287. All right, let's throw it in the calculator and see. 215.40 plus 0.02 times 7287 gives me $361.13. Minimum payment. So that will appear on your credit card statement that you get in the mail. But remember that you do not just pay that. That is worst case scenario. That is if you're in real deep money trouble. That's the amount required to keep your account and your credit score in good standing. But you really want to pay the balance in full. Pay the full principal, not just 2,000 of it, the full 10,000. Final part of this is my principal still owing. He's still owed. The remaining balance is my original balance, well, after I made a prepayment, minus my mandatory payment off principal from my minimum payment here. So this part is being subtracted from this part. So that's going to give me, what do we got? Starting principal, 7,287 minus 2% of that, 7,287. All right, so if I throw that in the calculator, as a little shortcut you might want to use, you could just multiply 0.98 times your balance owing. If you're working with the percentages, you know how that would work. If not, just keep doing it as I showed you. This is going to give us $7,141.26 still owing after I made my prepayment, and then I made the prepayment, got a new principal, and then I made a minimum payment, got a new principal. All right. On to the third. I'll go through this one a little bit quicker. It's exactly the same. The only difference is in this first step, calculating the prepayment. Once you've got that under wraps, though, the rest of the question is pretty much copy and paste. So once again, we have a full balance. That is my starting principal. I'll call that PI because I am, once again, realizing that I have this big outstanding bill this big debt, and Effie is making a payment off principal of, now it's not giving me an amount, but it's going to give me a percent. So this, again, needs to be equal to my payment off principal, or prepayment. I like that word better. Not a payment off principal, but a prepayment. All right, so let's first start off by figuring out our prepayment. All right, so my principal is going to be equal to my initial principal minus my prepayment. The only change to this question is the percentage. Otherwise, it's identical. All right, so now I need to figure out my prepayment. My prepayment is a percentage of my balance owing. So my prepayment is going to be equal to my principal initial times that prepayment amount. All right, 0.2174 in this case. That is the percent prepaid. All right, so for me, that's going to be 11,199 times 0.2174. The tricky part here is they give two interest rates. That throws most people for a loop the first time. Make sure that you are reading the question and differentiating between those. This one is my interest rate. This one is my prepayment. There is a difference there. Prepay. All right, so my prepayment, the 21% of my big $11,000 debt, 11,199 times 0.2174. I've paid off $2,434.66. No need to round extra there. That is not the credit card's math. That's your math. And now I can throw it into my equation. So my principal is equal to the 11,199 minus the 2,434.66 that I've prepaid. I just calculated. This is how much I still owe. This is my principal for the question. And I'm getting a amount still owing, a balance still owed, a starting principal of $8,764 and let's call it 34 cents. $64.34. Okay, so that again is an important number. That is my principal for the rest of the question. Okay, now let's motor through it. We've used these equations a bunch. A, interest is PR over 12, 8764.34. I just calculated it, times the rate. Don't use the 21%. That was my prepayment. Use the 19%. So 0.1984 divided by 12. I now have an interest cost of, let's not round this. I'm going to leave some extra decimals stored in my calculator there. All right, this is going to give me 1984 divided by 12, $144.91 of interest. All right, lower rate on the credit card does make a big difference. So if you know you're going to be having a balance outstanding, it always pays to have a lower interest rate. All right, now B, minimum payment. Min P is I plus POP, which I just calculated I, my interest, 144.91, plus a payment off principal, which is always 2%. And the principal amount that I'm using is $8,764.34 and change. I'll use my stored value to make this super precise. All right, so this is coming out as $320 minimum payment. That is my minimum payment. And the final part is how much I still owe. And then we just got one more credit card question that might make an appearance that is worth knowing. So it's P minus POP. All right, so my principal, 8764.34 minus payment off principal of 0.02 of that same principal, 8764.34. If you get tired of rewriting that number, all right, you could just store it in your calculator. You could do this in 2 steps, and now you have the payment off principal to subtract. Lots of ways to make your life easier. All right, here, the outstanding balance, the amount of principal I still owe is going to be $8,589.05. All right, so just some minor tweaks in that first step for series 2 and 3, determining how much you've paid off before the bill is actually due. Anything you pay off before, right, anything that you realize and make a payment off is not going to be charged interest in part A. All right, and it's going to reduce how much you still owe in part B and C. All right, we are moving on to the final credit card question. Final question of the video. This is a series 5, and in some ways they're actually going to be easier than series 2 and 3 once you get the hang of them. So the big difference with series 5 is they're not making a prepayment like series 2 and 3. So this is actually my full principal. It's not an initial that I need to take a prepayment off because they're unable to make any other payments, unable to pay any balance. Then they give me an interest rate, and again, that's just the interest, RI, interest rate, rate of interest. It's not a payment off principal. Very important to read what each percent and each variable represents. So part A, straightforward, exactly the same as series 1. It's just PRI over 12. 11,321 divided by 12. Sorry, we forgot the interest rate. 0.2536. All right, punch that in. 11,321 times 0.2536 divided by 12. He owes interest of $239.25. That is actually the answer to part A. 1 out of 3 done. Part B and C is where things might get a little bit trickier because we are looking at 2 different monthly periods. All right. Part 1 is actually going to be exactly the same as our regular balance owing after our payment. So B is actually the same as C from series 1, 2, and 3 in series 1 through 3. B is the same as C. So in this case, we're calculating our principal still owing, which is, again, just my original principal minus that 2% payment off principal. That's straightforward. All right, that is a 3-second equation to pop in the calculator. 11,321 minus 2% of 11,321. All right, pop that in the calculator. 11,321 minus 2% of 11,321 gives me $1,194.58. That's how much balance or principal is remaining after his first monthly payment. That is my answer. Principal still owed. And maybe I'll call it first because it's off my first monthly payment. or my first amount owed. All right, where people get a little bit confused in this Series 5 and where you really need to think things through and know your stuff is Part C. It's actually worded the exact same with one key difference. We're looking now at the second month. All right, let's put some context to this. This was your balance you owed. You made your minimum payment, and this is how much you still owe after the minimum payment. All right, again, it only went down like $230. Not a huge change. We roll into the second month. There's not a ton of context here, but let's assume that we are again unable to pay the balance. We make no prepayment. We make no payment off our balance. So now we're rolling into the second month, and the amount that I still owed after the first month is the amount that I start off the second month owing. This is becoming my principal for Part C. That is the key thing to know. That is the key difference. Principal, right, from Part B is changing. So in C, let's call it the principal still owed first, which I just calculated. It becomes the principal for my second month statement. All right. So this, which I just calculated, that I still owed after my first payment, is now becoming my principal for the next month. All right. So when I calculate the principal I still owe after the second month, I've made a little chip off of it in the first month. So I don't go back and use the full starting principal. I use my slightly reduced principal after I made that 2% payment off principal mandatorily. So that is my new principal. So the principal I owe after the second month is equal to the principal. Again, my answer from Part C, from Part B, minus that 2% payment off principal once again. So all I'm doing is using my answer from B as my principal in C. So this is how it's going to work out. My new principal in Part C is $11,094.58. And I'm going to subtract 2% of that principal again. 11,094.58. What does that give me? Well, the final answer. 1194 minus 2% of itself is $10,872.69. So we're slowly getting closer. It would take a long time to get that down to zero, though. That is the trick for doing these Series 5 or finding the chain of events after we make one payment. How does it affect the next month? Well, if we made no additional payments, just the minimum payment, all right, we're going to use the previous month's new principal as our new starting point to calculate. We could keep going. This could be the principal starting into the third month, and we could do the same steps with this principal to find the amount I still owed after 3 months, so on and so forth. All right, that is that. Thank you for watching. Hopefully that makes some sense. Let me know if you have any questions.